This episode, I talk with Sean DeCrane, Director of Health and Safety at the International Association of Firefighters. Sean shares his journey from being a Cleveland firefighter to a fire safety advocate, emphasizing the importance of firefighter involvement and co-development. He discusses the critical role of understanding building construction and fire codes for improving firefighter safety. The episode dives into emerging trends, such as risks posed by lithium-ion batteries, and highlights the need for standardized testing and public education. Sean also addresses this issue of single-exit stairways in mid-rise buildings, advocating for multiple egress routes. Tune in for insights on leveraging technology and collaboration to enhance fire safety. All right, take two, Sean. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. Welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And just so you see, I'm not in prison, okay? That's just the museum behind us, the Corcoran Museum behind us.
I was wondering why there were bars on the window.
I just saw him in the the reflection of the camera. I'm like, okay. I'm here on my own free will, Tim.
I appreciate that. Maybe some of my guests might not think that they are, so I'm glad that you shared that. So that way, when people watch this or listen to it, they understand that this is all voluntary. So
yeah, I'll reassess at the end.
Well, Sean, welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. Excited to have you on. Definitely a couple topics that you and I have been kind of going back and forth with as it relates to fire safety and some emerging technologies that I think would be a good discussion to have. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I'm familiar with you, but maybe we should give our listeners a little bit about your background, and what really led you to now being the Director of Health and Safety at the International Association of Firefighters.
Well, like in many stories in the fire service, it all involved free beer and a dare. So, it's true. I mean, I don't want to get into the long story, but short story, I was on a rescue squad in Cleveland, Ohio, fighting fires, having a great time. And one of the guys I played rugby with, Steve Tyler, not the musician Steve Tyler, but said, hey, listen, he worked for a trade association, passive fire protection. And he said, hey, our trade association is having a meeting, and we really want to engage the fire service and talk about training.
Okay.
And at the time, I was on a line company, and I was the secretary for our local union, and we're going into contract negotiations. And I said, Steve, I'm pretty busy right now. He goes, oh, did I mention the meetings in Key West? I go, whoa, hey, calendar just opened up a little bit. And he goes, we'll pay all your expenses. And I said, well, what about my bar tab? And Steve had to contemplate it because he knew the bar tab would be more than the airfare, but he said, yeah, we got it covered. And I went to this talking about passive fire protection, and we were talking with the education department, but on a break, some of the members of their code working group came over and started talking to me and said, what do you think about the building codes? What do you think about the fire codes? Mm-hmm. And this is just after the ICC was created, and you had the amalgamation of the legacy codes. And I said, they're getting more strict, right, all the time. Buildings are getting better, and then they started to talk about some of the changes that have been made and the compromises that were made in the amalgamation of the codes.
Okay.
And then they dared me. They said, you live in Cleveland, and there's a code hearing in Cincinnati in 2 weeks. Why don't you attend the code hearing? And so, that is a big double dog dare to go from Cleveland to Cincinnati. So
yeah,
I did, and what I saw were a lot of really well-meaning folks that really would talk about the fire service, what the goals of the fire service, what our tactics were. Mm-hmm. But I could tell that none of these folks, I shouldn't say that, many of these folks never served in the fire service, never crawled down a dark hallway, never hoping that their bell didn't go off. And so I went to the microphone and I spoke to a code change proposal about marking fire barriers. And someone went up to the microphone and said, firefighters checking my drop ceilings, I'd get more value out of them emptying my waste baskets. So I stuck around, and him and I became very good friends. He was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that. But what I really found is if the fire service wants to be involved with improving our work environment, we have to be involved with the processes that define that work environment. Our work
Right.
environment is not the fire station. It's where we respond to and operate in. And,
Yep.
the building and fire codes do that, how our buildings are designed, built, and maintained. So, long story short, I wrote a letter to the IFF and said, hey, we need to be involved in this process. And they said, congratulations, you just volunteered. And so that led to my involvement in the code process, which
Okay.
then led to my involvement getting to know UL, which then led to my involvement with UL Fire Safety Research Institute and being a member of the advisory board, and ultimately really enhanced my career in Cleveland. And then when I retired, I went to UL for 6 years. And then there was the opportunity to come back home to the IFF, and I did. So that's how I ended up here in DC.
So you're in DC right now. So, I think you kind of hit on a lot of key ideas here, and a lot of it's about perspective, right? Being able to share your perspective, and the code adoption process is a consensus approach. And so, if the fire service isn't involved, there are definitely challenges that we could have to the codes that are being adopted. They may not actually address the risk that they're intended to address. And so you mentioned also too, it enhanced your ability or enhanced your current position of being in Cleveland. Can you talk about that a little bit and how it really enhanced you, made you maybe a better firefighter by being more involved in the code development process?
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges we have in the fire service is we have so much to be cognizant of and so much to be responsible for in our education and training. And I didn't have a really full grasp of that. Here I was responding and operating, and as an officer responsible for 3 other firefighters. And I really started finding out how much I didn't know about building construction and building design, how much I didn't know about the building systems that are being integrated into the buildings, and the changing materials and the building construction practices that were coming to the market. And a lot of that was, all of a sudden it's front and center when you're in those code hearings, and you have that debate and you have the sharing of knowledge. And then when we started getting involved in the research and the testing at UL, that really opened the door to trying to understand my work environment more and the curiosity in it. So then it was kind of like you turned to being a junkie, right? You started wanting to know more about this building type or this construction practice or these building materials, and starting to demand testing, the appropriate testing. And so it really allowed me to improve, I believe, as a firefighter and fire officer, understanding that built environment and how it's going to perform under fire conditions.
Yeah, and I think you brought up one good, important point. I think that understanding the building construction, but also the fire service features that go into a lot of these buildings. As being a fire marshal, a lot of times we deal with alternative means requests or alternative AMMRs is what, the brief definition or the acronym that we use. But we utilize those, I don't want to say frequently, but from time to time, and they incorporate occasionally, different fire service features. And it's important, one, to know those, why they're important and why they're there. To be able to get that information out to different folks, especially that are going to be responding in case there is an emergency.
Oh, absolutely. I look at ventilation systems and fire command centers, and I've talked with people I respect, from a command level, and I say, okay, what do you guys do when you respond with the ventilation systems? They go, we shut everything down. I went, especially in modern buildings, they're there for your assistance. They're there to help you, and so I think that's something that, here at the IFF, I want to change that. And we just had a couple of 2-day workshops where we brought in like Jack Murphy and to talk about building fire command centers and utilizing building systems and what to look for and engaging that building engineer. Right. So you can utilize these systems. You and I could probably sit here and give a ton of examples, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that go into, the building that are designed, especially as you mentioned, earlier, the buildings are getting built a little bit better. There are new things that are going into the building to be able to help that you would not necessarily think that would be a feature that the fire service should be aware of. But there are new features that are going into the buildings because of the code development process to be able to help make those conditions more tenable, not only for the occupants, but also the firefighters that are responding to these calls.
Yeah, well, look at how many changes we made in the building and fire code after 9/11, after the
Right.
NIST report came out when the towers collapsed, especially World Trade Center 7, the remoteness of the exit stairwells and the lessons that we learned. And
Yep.
so again, yeah, that's paying dividends for the firefighters coming on the job now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked a little bit about your experience, but I'd like to hear maybe some of those key experiences, maybe outside of that initial Key West, trip, and that your first. I mean, I will commend you going to your first code hearing in Cincinnati and getting up to the mic and having speaking and testifying is always one. That's always kind of an intimidating process, especially with the number of people that are in that room. But can you talk a little bit about some key experiences that really have shaped your perspective on fire prevention and fire safety?
Yeah, well, I'm a shy person, you can tell that. But no, I think, one of the biggest issues when I first started getting involved, and I was trying to get the attention of the IFF, and we're a trade organization, and listen, they embraced it, right? And I have a lot to thank them for that embracement. And shortly after we started getting involved in the code process, we lost a firefighter in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Arnie Wolf.
Okay.
And it was the collapse of a lightweight floor system. And the NIOSH report came out, the line of duty death investigation, which is there not to find fault, just to identify contributing factors, identified the early collapse of that engineered floor system. So we tried to change the residential code. And again, we were early in our participation. We were requesting a 30-minute fire-rated floor system in a single-family or two-family home, right? And I always go back to the Bill Cosby skit about the wife throwing the conniption. I think many people on that committee were literally having a conniption with the cost of a rated floor in a residential home. But out of it, you started learning the process.
Yeah.
And it was at that time you all got their first AFG grant and started studying the fire impact on residential floors. Because prior to that, you had a combustible floor. Why would you do a fire resistance rating on a combustible floor when it's not required? But that started giving us the real empirical data to demonstrate the early collapse. And then there was a couple other studies. The National Research Council of Canada also did a study. And we brought it back to the codes. And really, the National Association of Home Builders, the American Wood Council reached out and said, listen, you've brought some very compelling information. We want to sit down and talk. And ultimately, we went from that being defeated to, and in Minneapolis, after the residential sprinkler, half the room left, and our code change proposal was the next one. But I think it was better because we came back and they were our partners, changing the code to require the protection of lightweight floor systems in 1 and 2 family homes in the residential code in the 2012 edition. And that really taught me a lesson that, hey, we can be successful here. And the importance of partnerships and relationships. And we're not always going to agree at the microphone.
Right.
I understand that. We have responsibilities to our organizations, but that doesn't mean we have to be adversaries, and it doesn't mean that we can't find common ground, because in many cases I found that the vast majority of people in that room want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And they just have to understand what that, or come to an agreement what that right thing is. And we may have different perceptions at times, but if we're having dialogue and we're sharing information, it's amazing how the right thing is very close to what each other is trying to obtain.
Yeah. Yeah, partnerships are key in the code development process, and I think that we're going to talk a little bit about that as we continue to move through this. But I think, as you mentioned, all of us, or at least those of us that are involved in the code development process, have similar goals in the sense that we don't want to increase risk. We actually want to reduce risk, and we want to provide, better fire and life safety to the occupants of that building. And how do we do that? And it is a balancing act, right? A lot of times when we talk about fire and life safety and code development, how do we balance regulation with the cost impact?
Right.
And that is that's why being involved in the code development process is so vital. But
I agree with you.
so now let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about maybe some emerging trends that are now we're starting to see in the code development process in lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion batteries are definitely something that are making headlines across the world, and we've talked to a lot of different folks on this podcast in regards to the risks associated with lithium-ion batteries and the different things, anywhere from talking to Fire Commissioner Laura Cavanaugh with the FDNY, Deputy Fire Chief up in Toronto, Larry Coco, about the different things. So we've been trying to take this wide perspective and talk to all the different experts associated with it. But I kind of wanted to visit with you a little bit, especially about those risks associated for firefighters that are responding to fires associated with lithium-ion batteries. We've talked a lot about how can we prevent them, but also too, I think it's important the risks associated for firefighters when they respond to fires associated with lithium-ion batteries. So can you share a little bit about the risks that might impact firefighters?
Yeah. How much time do we have? No. Here's one of the biggest challenges is we're still early in trying to understand what those risks are, right?
Yep.
We recently did a project under an agreement with the Department of Energy. It was funded by the Department of Energy. The IFF partnered with UL Solutions and UL Fire Safety Research Institute, where we were looking at residential energy storage systems installed in a garage.
Okay.
And the funding allowed us to do basically 4 tests. And I just talked with DOE yesterday, even further on this. And what the test allowed us to do is identify the hazards. So we're identifying hazards as it relates to a failed lithium-ion battery. You can say it's a residential energy storage unit, but it could be an EV, it could be an e-bike.
Right.
Chemistry is pretty darn consistent across those. It's just the volume that we're dealing with.
Right.
So we're trying to identify what that hazard is, and then we're going to be able to utilize that information to volume it up or scale it up. So we know that as these batteries off gas, as they start to fail, we have a unique challenge here. We're responding basically to a flammable gas incident early in the event.
Right.
And right when it starts to fail, that explosion hazard is now present. Depending on how much gas is released, that is going to be the scale of that hazard, what that explosion hazard may be. So typically, if you and I responded to the release of a flammable gas, we would try to be isolating any potential ignition sources, create ventilation, try to mitigate the situation. The challenge we have here is that battery is failing inside of an enclosed garage, a compartment, and we can't isolate the ignition sources because the battery is the ignition source in most cases.
Yep.
So that's what we're really trying to identify. Okay, so we're knowing the hazards here. We also know that battery gas is bad. We know it contains heavy metals, but what we don't know is the extent of the risk to our members. How effective is our PPE? Are these heavy metals getting through the PPE? Are they being absorbed dermally? Are we inhaling it? Is it off-gassing off our gear? And how is this comparable to a internal combustion engine or a regular house fire?
Yeah.
They're all bad, right? It's kind of identifying the individual hazards associated with that particular release. So I think we're doing some more research. I was out in Spokane 2 weeks ago, and we did a 2-day workshop there. There were some folks that are concluding a research project. I believe it's kind of a major research project, looking at the exposure to the PPE, then looking at laundering methods.
Yep.
I know we've had some instructors, I get members that contact me. Somebody was at a class recently where the instructor told them that batteries are so hazardous that when they respond to it, they have to throw out all of their PPE. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Whoa.
You know, how many communities can afford to just dispose of
Replace. Yeah.
$7,000 of PPE on a hunch that it's bad?
Yeah.
You know? So I think this information is important, but
Yeah.
it's also important that we allow the research processes to take the time that's needed to do it right.
Right.
That too many people want to jump in and just make assumptions and also draw conclusions before actually going through the exercises and analyzing the information. So I guess in a long-winded way, we're still trying to identify all of the hazards associated with these battery fires, but we've narrowed it down, or we really focused on the exposure hazard, especially the heavy metals and
Right.
hydrogen cyanide if it's involved, and also the explosion hazards associated with it, and the stored energy, the stranded energy, and
Yeah.
how do we handle these things. We don't necessarily want our members taking these off the wall if it's a residential energy storage system, but who can they involve that has that expertise?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're really still looking for those definitive answers to what we've identified so far.
Yeah. How do you render it safe, right? To be able to move it. And
Right.
I think I saw a fire. It was in an EV. It was in, I think, Centennial. And I think the EV was in the garage maybe. And then they covered it with one of the, as we talk about new methods to be able to deploy, to be able to address these types of fires. But they used a blanket, put it on a flatbed, and then towed it out of there. I'm sure that there was a lot more than what was shown on the YouTube video that I watched to be able to deploy that, get it on the flatbed and get it out of there. But these things are hazardous, and how do you render those things safe so that way you can then effectively move that stranded energy so that way it doesn't continue to cause that hazard?
So you bring up a good point. We see a lot of products coming to market. And during my presentations or here at the IFF, I get a lot of inquiries saying, okay, what's the answer to these battery fires? We came across this product that's going to solve the problem. And Adam Barrow and I recently visited a different country that's looking at this. And they had a test project up for EVs, and they were going to utilize the blanket. And they have a series of tests that they're going to do. But they want to see, hey, can we just utilize the blanket? It's a metropolitan city, so letting the EV burn in the middle of the city isn't an option.
Right.
So they posted a video of it, and it shows like, oh, hey, this blanket worked pretty effectively. And then I saw representatives from this country at a recent meeting here in the U.S. And I said, hey, a little birdie told me that video has been edited. And there was a little bit of a smile, and they said, well, a little bit. And they took out, someone had lifted a corner or hit the blanket, and the corner came up, and a jet flame came shooting out because the blanket, remember, the blanket's not absorbing the heat. The blanket is not utilizing any extinguishing effect. It's confining the effects of the thermal runaway. It's not stopping the runaway. So you have an accumulation of that hydrogen gas. And so we've seen other additives come into the market making these claims, but we don't see any research that's demonstrating the effectiveness of an additive, of a particular device that's being marketed out to the firefighters. And our firefighters are looking for answers, and sometimes it's hard to tell them the research is ongoing, we're going to get there, but you're spending $20,000 on something that hasn't been demonstrated to be any more effective than water. And getting water to the burning surface is our challenge in any fire. What if it's an attic fire, basement fire, or an EV? We're seeing all these tools that, from a health and safety perspective at the IFF, I don't have a lot of comfort in.
Yeah, and I think you highlight a good point that, as these things come to market, but also too, as we talk about laundering PPE and those types of things, especially associated with lithium-ion batteries, it's being data driven, right? Having the data to be able to make informed decisions to, one, identify the risk, but then to hopefully address that risk. And we have to be able to do it with data. And there's so much out there right now. I mean, I know that with the hoverboards and those types of things, that was just kind of the initial our initial introduction into lithium-ion batteries. But there's been so much that has changed, and there's this push to go electric, and I think that us as the fire service are continuing to try to find ways to address the hazard. I don't think a lot of us maybe saw this kind of how big maybe some of these challenges would be, but now that we see them, how do we address it? But I think data is definitely going to be part of that, and that's going to, I think, take a lot of us, and the IFF, and then also UL and the Fire Safety or Fire Research Institute. I think all of that is definitely going to help us as we go to try to address the risk associated with lithium-ion batteries.
So you kind of mentioned hoverboards, and it just sparked a thought. I mean, we know standardized testing is a component of the answer, and we saw it with hoverboards. When hoverboards came to the market, it was open game, right?
Yep.
And then they started to fail. Now, when these products fail, consumers start to lose faith or confidence in the product.
Right.
So really, standardized testing helps products come to the market. And you saw a country like Australia that banned hoverboards until there was a standardized test. And we've seen the incidence of hoverboard failures dramatically decrease because of the standardized tests that come in. So the other challenge is enforcement of it. So we can require these standardized tests, but we need the enforcement to ensure that these products are meeting a standardized test, that they are coming to the market safe. And I think that's a huge component of the answer.
Yeah. And actually, you're keying in on my next question as we talk about how can we not only improve the safety of firefighters, but also consumers and the industries that utilize lithium-ion batteries. I mean, we products that we now bring into our home, but also to the industries that also utilize lithium-ion batteries. How can we promote some safety awareness and reduce that risk associated with lithium-ion batteries as we're using them in our homes and businesses?
This is something we've talked about in the fire service for many years through Vision 2020 and other efforts, and it's the extreme difficulty of penetrating that public education market. And USFA is attempted, NFPA, great programs, right? But you have a limited market research, and to fund a national program, it's tough, it's expensive. I think there are programs that are out there. I think a lot of it is educating the public. It's educating legislatures. It's educating industry as well. If there is a safer way to approach this, standardized testing is one. Making sure products meet a specific performance requirement to demonstrate safety, coming to the market. The other is how our public purchases these products. I understand everyone's looking to find a cheaper model. There are cost restrictions, but just because it's available at that, I don't want to use a name of a store,
I know what you mean.
That
but a retailer,
that's done at the end of the street, doesn't mean it's a viable product. And saving a couple of bucks here could have safety consequences down the road. I remember one of my last fires in Cleveland as an incident commander was just that. It was a teenage kid who went down to that little discount store at the end of the street and purchased a cheap charger for his laptop. And the 16-year-old burnt the house down. And it was a low-income neighborhood. This family you could tell this family was that family on the block that everyone went to, everyone congregated at. And I said, hey, insurance will cover this. He goes, I can't get insurance in this neighborhood. He goes, I can't rebuild this house. I'm going to have to move. And so there's a socioeconomic here. But back to your question, sorry. But we need a public education campaign. I know Larry Coco has done, some people will say cuckoo, but sorry, Larry, it was a slip of the tongue, but follow up. But I know he's put together a real nice program up in Toronto, pushing out that public education program. UL FSRI has built the CHARGE program that our local departments can go and adopt, like the Close Your Door campaign, It was very successful in raising awareness on the importance of closing that door. And the CHARGE program can do that. It educates people, don't charge your device, don't use a cheap charger. Use the charger that came from the manufacturer. Don't charge the device overnight. I bet you 90% of us are guilty of that
Yeah.
with our cell phones.
Yep.
But if you're going to charge it, do it during the daytime, and don't do it in your means of egress.
Right.
And also recognize that these batteries are sensitive to damage, they're sensitive to abuse, to shock. That inner layer, that separator can be very fragile.
Mm-hmm.
So it can tear. You can get indentations on that battery that causes that friction point. So I think, it's going to take a concerted effort, but not only from the national organizations like FSRI or UL or NFPA or USFA, but the local departments have to adopt the responsibility themselves
Right.
to get that education out to their community.
So you brought me into my next question as we talk about how to be able to
I'm not
get...
even reading them. So,
Well, it's just natural flow. This is actually kind of good. You're like predicting where I'm going to go here. As you talk about local fire authorities and fire departments, how can we, better, share that information? I know a lot of us try to do it through social media and try to get that, impact, try to meet with different individuals. But I know for myself, a lot of times sharing safety messages may not necessarily have that same impression if I share it on social media, and may not have that the desired impact that I'm hoping for. So how can we better share information, especially as it relates back to fire safety and fire prevention, as a local agency?
yeah, it's a good question. I think I was involved with Vision 2020, who we first originated. And that was one of the questions that we constantly asked.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good information here. How do we get it to the people that need it? How do you translate it into the multi-languages that may be relevant within that community?
Yeah.
Community risk reduction program was an avenue that many departments have used and have used successfully. Some departments, maybe it wasn't as successful. Was it because of the commitment level? I don't know. Or was it the lack of community acceptance of it?
Right.
I don't know, right? But I think one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is it's not a one and done.
Right.
It's what is it? I'm trying to remember. You might remember. NFPA kind of looked at and they said, if you look at the curriculum in grade school, or this might have been Kerber's group when we were going through Explore Labs.
Yep.
You didn't have any fire safety messaging after like 4th or 5th grade.
Right.
And so we lose the kids then.
Yeah.
You're not reinforcing that message. And it takes an investment to develop age-related material that's going to keep their attention. But I think it's something that we have to commit to. I think USFA could be a leader in this. That we want to develop age-appropriate education materials. But then we have to, at the fire department levels, and listen, at the IFF, if I reflect on it, we can do a better job of getting some of this public education out to our membership as well.
Yeah.
And say, hey, have a safety day or sponsor safety days at the school. So I think for it to be successful, it has to be on multiple layers,
Yeah.
It has to be like a parfait.
Right.
Multiple layers.
You're making me hungry now. Now, I would agree with you. I think a lot of our fire safety education stops at, the elementary school age, and we don't really, continue to be able to, I'm not saying we don't continue, but we have a harder time engaging older kids and even adults in regards to fire safety and fire prevention. And I even, I think about my own family, and I work and live, the fire service, but my family doesn't, live it as much as I do. And I'll come home and my wife has bought a new product that is not a listed product. She bought it from a discount retailer online. And so I start to look at it and I'm like, where did this come from? And when it's not a listed product, that obviously raises concerns for me. When are you using it? How are you using it? And what are kind of the safety features built into it? Because I don't know. Kind of goes back to our conversation about hoverboards. And so I just think about it from my own perspective of being, a husband and a father, and knowing that my family, even though I'm in the fire service, doesn't always engage in the same behaviors that I would.
I showed 2 videos. We had niece and nephew were visiting us, and really, really smart kids, electrical engineers, master's degrees. And they were over, and it was right before they started the family. They said, look, Sean, what are you working on? And I showed them the furniture comparison.
Okay.
And that was, oh God, I don't know. That was the original one before it was redone.
Okay.
And they still talk about it. And the close before your doze.
Yep.
When I showed the video where Steve had those folks come in from the street, right? They just brought these people in and did the demonstration in front of them. My wife saw that, and every single night that bedroom door is closed.
Yeah.
Sometimes she locks it to keep me out, but every single night that door is closed. But I think those visual tools can be very effective. And I think sometimes we rely on handouts and all this, hey, a pamphlet here, a pamphlet there. If we can find a way to visually capture those folks and show, whoa, that fire moved fast.
Right. It makes me think about FSRI's video on the charge campaign and showing the e-scooter that they have in the living room and the explosion that happens and the reaction that the people watching that video get from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we, for me, it's like, how do I get that information out? I think what was it? The Today Show did a section on it, but how do then we continue with that momentum to be able to get that shared out there a little bit more and bring, continue to bring that awareness? Yeah,
well, I think Steve would love everybody to go to the FSRI website, www.fsri.org,
right,
and utilize that video and utilize the tools they have. But you're right. I think right now the challenge we have is so much of what it's a one hit, and then we live in that society today that it's like, what's coming up on your phone next? Right?
Yeah, we need somebody that's really social media savvy, that can do some some good. You have TikToks and Instagram Reels and all those short 10-second videos or 30-second videos that can capture people's attention. I don't think that I'm that guy. I'd much rather talk for 30, 40 minutes about the thing instead of short little clips. But I do think that that's one way that we could capture. I know my daughter, I would hate to look at how much time she actually spends on her phone during the day. I would imagine it probably as much time as I'm on my computer at work. But that might, if we could maybe do social media campaigns to be able to share that information, that might help us continue to grow and develop some safety behaviors.
That's where to close your door, those social media campaigns. And Zoe was able to, include influencers. You and I don't know what the heck an influencer is.
No.
But that was very effective. Getting that catchy note, that was very effective.
Yeah. Now, as we talk a little bit about how we can be safer at home and firefighters improve firefighter safety and reduce the risk, what are some regulatory things that we can look at as we talk about lithium-ion batteries? And I know that we've talked a little bit about the hoverboards and the listings of those particular products, but what are some other things that we can look at to be able to try to maybe help improve through regulation to address the issue of lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, no, great question. I think we go back to standards are not there to block industry's efforts in the marketplace.
Right. Yeah.
Standards are there to help products come to the marketplace safely, and we've learned a lot. That first year, that first edition, we got some information in the fire code on lithium-ion batteries was very, very rudimentary. Limited to 50 kilowatt hours, 3-foot separation. The whole idea that you're going to have a failure and it's not going to propagate. And then we said, unless you do fire testing, what did that mean?
Yeah.
But we've come a long way, and Adam Barrowy, Pravin Gandhi, Bob Backstrom did a lot of research, and now Alex Schraber at UL Solutions, a lot of research in these batteries, and we know a lot more. So now we have UL 9540A to do the fire testing.
Right.
But I think the installation standard, the NFPA 855, is critically important.
Yeah.
And so we're having these installed and then maintained, and not just commercial units, but also the residential units as they're installed. I think what we have to do at the regulatory level is get the politicians, the legislatures that are responsible for enacting these laws, to recognize that yes, this is a hazard. You can have those energy goals and you can be green, or you can just say we need help to support our infrastructure,
right,
our energy demand. I get all that, but you can do it safely too, and you can do it responsibly. And I know some states are really slow to adopt the latest edition of the codes, but that doesn't prevent you, if you're a state, going through a revision and say, listen, and we did this in Ohio for the protection of lightweight construction.
Okay.
Ohio was going through the 2009 edition, and they were going to adopt that. But utilizing research, actually the co-chair of the Residential Advisory Committee made a motion to adopt the language from the 2012 edition as it related to protecting lightweight construction.
Okay.
Based on the research. He was a home builder. And yeah, and it was, if you give him the information. And so, listen, you're going through that. You can reach out and take the language of that code of a future edition, if you need to, even if it's short term, and say, this is what we're going to require. We're going to require you to do this safely. You have to be installed to 855. You have to do the appropriate testing. You have to submit the appropriate reports so they can be evaluated. If you don't have the ability at the local level at the fire department, you're not a fire protection engineer, require third-party interpretation of an independent engineer that has experience and the qualifications to review and interpret that report. So I think the legislative tools are there. We just need folks to enact them, to have the courage to do it. And for our building officials and fire officials, we need you to be advocates at the local level to say, listen, we have challenges here. We can still meet these goals that we have in the green market space or renewable, like I said, all those areas. But we have some solutions. Is it going to evolve over time? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we do that with every industry, right? We're trying to make sure that people are safe, and the regulations aren't meant to be a obstacle for people to overcome. It's so that way we make sure that there's a level of safety involved for everyone that's going to be engaged in whatever activity it is. And I think that that's really why the codes, fire codes and standards exist, is to be able to help improve that level of safety. No matter we've seen those changes over the last several hundred years as it relates back to building and fire codes, and I think it should be noted that it's not meant to be a barrier, but it's meant to make sure that we're doing it safely. And how do we do that? So yeah, and I think about like regulatory things, and it's one of those things that so many times that many will feel that that's what it is. It's kind of burdensome, but it's not meant to be that. Now, you brought up the point of maintenance, and I think that is something that many people probably should think about as we talk about lithium-ion batteries, but also our home energy storage systems and our larger battery energy storage systems that I don't want to say gets overlooked, but definitely a consideration as we put these things into practice and how we can better maintain them, so that way we don't have we're not faced with risk.
No, I think that's an critically important thing, and especially in buildings. When that building receives its occupancy permit, it looks great, right? It only takes a few minutes for that cable contractor to come in and start, cutting through that passive fire protection. But let me relate. Someone buys a new car, they're constantly waxing it or taking it to the a car wash, making sure it's vacuumed. The kids cannot eat their French fries in there. A couple of years later, the kid dropped it. We'll get it later, right?
Right.
We got to make sure that these energy systems that we're putting in our homes, that's where your family lives.
Right.
that we keep that new car feel for it and make sure it's maintained.
Yeah. Yeah, and also too, I think that you know the maintenance, but also maybe going back, even putting these things in service. You mentioned involving such subject matter experts to be able to review these things. I think is vitally important. I know that I've definitely. I mean, I'm familiar with lithium-ion batteries and the technology associated with them, but I also seek out input from experts so that way they can help me understand, like you said, the UL 9540A test and the documents that we get, especially as we go to put these into place. Don't be afraid or to involve subject matter experts that can help you review these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another topic that's kind of been one of those that is starting to gain some momentum right now, and we're having a lot of discussion on is single exit stairways, especially for mid-rise buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you had recently authored an article, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because I know that there are different states and places across the country, but not only the country, the world, exploring single exit stairways. And so we talk about the balance earlier, making sure that we balance risk and safety and code, and how do we get all that so that way we don't put people more at risk. Can you talk a little bit about what a single exit stairway is, and maybe some of the challenges associated with firefighting and the firefighters responding to calls?
Yeah, it varies in a couple of different areas. We've seen 11 states have legislation that's been introduced. We've seen multiple provinces up in Canada where legislation has been introduced to basically circumvent the building code and permit residential buildings, in most cases up to 6 stories, allow them to have one means of egress.
Mm-hmm.
So typically when you go above 3 stories here in the US, you're going to be required to have 2 means of egress, so 2 stairwells.
Mm-hmm.
From a fire service perspective, this makes a lot of sense. One, it's a reduction of egress time for that occupant.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the nearest means of egress, nearest stairwell, and affect their exit out of the structure. But for us operationally, it also gives us a stairway for operations. So you can still, if there are people still within that structure that you have to evacuate or remove, you have a stairwell to do that, but you're not limiting your operations.
Mm-hmm.
I think a prime example was during 9/11, a lot of us saw the pictures of FDNY trying to go up the stairwell. Meanwhile, people were trying to effect egress.
Right.
And the whole thought process had been, well, if you have sprinklers in these high rises, your operations, you're not going to affect a full building egress or evacuation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, anywhere from 3 to 6 floors most likely. So you only need the egress for that. The building protection systems will keep the fire in check,
Mm-hmm.
so you can still do your job.
Right.
9/11 showed us that it didn't demonstrate it. It didn't show us that. It highlighted some of the deficiencies in our thinking sometimes, I believe, from a code approach, that these trade-offs were allowing a trade-off of fire protection or other systems in order to encourage the installation of a second one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great to an extent. And I think what we have to keep in mind, we go back to the maintenance issue.
Mm-hmm.
When we do that, we're reliant on all of those systems to perform as designed,
Right.
and effectively in that moment of crisis. Whether it's day 1 of the occupancy, whether it's day 1001 of that occupancy,
Mm-hmm.
or 10,001. All those systems have to respond as designed. We unfortunately know that is not always the case. And so what we've seen out there is that advocates have been saying, we need to decrease the cost of construction. We want to increase affordable housing
Mm-hmm.
for those who are economically challenged. So we believe that we can safely utilize 1 stairwell in buildings up to 6 stories. I think while the intent is noble, I don't want to take that away from what they're trying to do.
Right.
I think it's a flawed approach, just because you are relying on all of these systems to protect 6 stories of people.
Right. What's the research showing? I mean, as we talked, being data driven, what's the current research? I mean, I know that there are places, doing, research to examine it. What's the research showing?
So I was reviewing one of the reports, and a consultant came in and started comparing code requirements throughout the world. And there are differences. We have different types of building construction throughout the world as well. And
Right.
we know in the UK and in areas of Europe, they operate with a single stairwell.
Right.
We've seen some incidents involving those buildings as well. Grenfell can come to mind right away. But I think what's important that's overlooked in the one, and I should have had my notes out in front of me, but when you do that risk analysis, risk versus reward, what's the
Right.
likelihood of event to occur? What's the consequence of that event to occur? And if you look holistically, you say, oh, well, look at, your risk rewards right up in here, it's moderate, You probably won't see an event, and it probably won't be bad, but it's taking the building as it's designed. Because then when you look at the risk factors, like the integrity of egress, facilities, and maintenance, the risk score, what's the likelihood of it to occur over the life of the building? And it's probable. What's the potential severity? Catastrophic. So we're talking about the maintenance of the egress and the integrity of the egress.
Right.
The likelihood of it to fail is probable, and the result is catastrophic. So when you start to look at all my greens and yellows, that they outweigh the reds, when you start to look at where the reds are, those should be warning lights everywhere, like
Right.
inspections and maintenance. What's the likelihood to occur over the life of the building based on various studies and fire investigations into failure of compartmentation? Probable. The score is 12. And what's the potential severity? Critical. Potential to cause significant impact on means of egress or means of escape. So we start looking at that. I think that should be raising the alarm bells. And I've seen proponents respond, and I think it's been frustrating, and the amount of, I don't even want to say passion, because it's okay to have passion for an effort or a topic.
Right.
But the mudslinging, the name calling, the viciousness, it's unprofessional, it's unwarranted. I've seen a lot of slights towards the fire service, that the fire service doesn't care about affordable housing, doesn't care about poor people. We just care about our shiny trucks. And I'm like, we take an oath. We take an oath to protect life and property.
Right.
We are the ones that put our lives on the line to go up that single stairwell
Right.
and search the 6th floor of an apartment because a sprinkler wasn't maintained by that building maintenance team. And now our members have to risk their life
Yeah.
in order to try to find and save that occupant. And it's really hard to sit there and listen to someone who can draw up things on a piece of paper and say, well, see, the system I designed, it's fine. There'll be no problems. Or the risk reward factor says it's okay. And to paint it's okay to have that belief, but to paint the fire service as uncaring. Our position at the IFF is that our members are the ones that respond to the economically depressed areas and the people that are underrepresented. Our folks are the ones that interact with those communities and are responsible for responding to those buildings. We don't think your economic status requires you to sacrifice fire safety.
Right.
And I've heard advocates say, well, if people are trapped in upper floors, doesn't the fire service carry ladders or aerial ladders? And you and I know that ladder operations, aerial operations, even for a trained firefighter, are high risk.
Yeah.
Because it's done under duress.
Yep.
It's done a lot of times at night. It's done in weather. And now under fire conditions where crap is falling on your head, broken windows, whatever it may be, you're operating on those conditions. We've seen firefighters injured and killed operating in those conditions. Now you're going to add the element of pulling an occupant that's scared out of their wits, maybe mentally compromised from carbon monoxide exposure, never received any training, and we're not even taking into the aspect of accessibility.
Right.
Can you get an aerial ladder there? Can you get a ladder, an extension ladder into that location at a safe angle? So I wish we could sit down and really just have adult conversations and say, you know, there are a lot of very, very valid concerns that the fire service brings to this discussion.
Right.
I understand the proponents have a lot of valid, you know, reasons to want to reduce the cost of building a structure. I think we can find some way forward, but it's going to, you know, have that. It's going to require that adult conversation.
Kind of goes back to that partnership discussion that we talked about earlier, as we were talking about the different lightweight construction and the floor ceiling assembly that we talked about earlier. And how do we come up with, how do we develop that partnership to be able to move forward? Have you seen any? Because I think that there's a lot of places looking at this. Have you seen any proposals that might provide that balance between the desire of the single exit stairway and then also mitigating the risk to fire response and the occupants?
Not yet. I mean, because where we've seen at the provincial level in Canada, and I think at a couple of the state levels, the legislature has remanded that over to the building department or fire department to research and come back with an evaluation. So, we're still in that part, I think, where people are jockeying for position and for messaging. And we haven't seen, from my perspective yet, we haven't seen that review or research come back from a building official or fire official perspective.
Okay.
And there may be one out there. I just haven't seen it yet. The only thing I've seen is a couple of commissioned reports from consultants. Not knocking them, they just, that's what I've seen so far, is the feasibility of it.
Right. It almost, to me, because there is this major momentum to do something about this, to be able to come up with some task force, like a task force that is equally represented, that everybody can have, like you mentioned, there are valid reasons on both sides, and how can we come together to be able to find a solution to address the housing crisis that we have? I mean, I think my 21-year-old son will never move out because he can't afford a house. But also too, I don't want him to move into an area that or into a building that he might be at risk. And you brought up the aspect of making sure that things get maintained, and if one of those components in that overall system fail, could be catastrophic. So how do we come together and find solutions to the problem? Because I don't think that this is a problem that will fade away. I think that this is going to be an ongoing discussion that we're going to have, because we do have an issue with affordable housing. We do have an issue of getting people into housing and move forward. But also too, we want to make sure that it's done safely, because it's pretty much our entire discussion today is like improving safety. But how can we do it and be able to provide that balance? And it'd be kind of nice, maybe that we go back. You mentioned the USFA providing us with some ways to be able to build on this, our public messaging. But maybe they can help us come together and come up with some solutions.
Yeah, I know NFPA is setting up they're scheduling a 2-day workshop.
Okay.
And I haven't seen the whole format. I believe the interest is to draw folks from various perspectives into a room and, hey, let's have the discussion.
Right.
Share with me why you're so confident this is going to work.
Yeah. Yep.
And I want to hear that. I don't want to see I don't do social media, so if anyone out there wants to send memes or attack me on social media, go ahead. I'm not going to see it, and so it's okay. But we can sit there and put social media posts out, but that I'm yet to see social media posts that change anyone's mind.
Yeah.
And when you're entrenched in a position, I think, hopefully this 2-day workshop, starts to bring that conversation forward. I think that could be the responsibility that NFPA and ICC have, is to bring the folks together to do that. I mean, ICC's done that with the Heighton Area Ad Hoc Committee, with the Healthcare Ad Hoc Committee. I was on the tall
wood
timber
buildings.
building, Ad Hoc Committee. That, to me, was a great exercise. We had multiple representations in the room, and we didn't have consensus walking in or walking out, but it was everyone respected each other after it. So I think there are examples of taking an issue such as this and bringing those parties together and having that exercise. It's not going to change overnight.
Right. Yeah.
And
do you feel that the discussion, you brought up tall wood buildings, and that discussion about trying to, improve the safety of those and be able to increase the height and area of those buildings as well. Do you think that there are some similar, comparisons that can be drawn from that experience to maybe the single exit stair discussion?
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking back to our first meeting as an ad hoc meeting. Proposals like, hey, we can go to 44, 45 stories. And I'm like, what?
And you're like, absolutely not. Hold on, wait.
How did we just go from 6 stories to 45 stories, right?
Right.
But really, it helped that a number of people in that ad hoc committee already had familiarity with each other. We knew each other from being involved in the ICC process. So there may be a little difference here. I don't think a lot of the proponents of this issue are involved in the codes process. I know they had a couple of code change proposals that were not successful this cycle, but it gave them a taste of it. But I think what's important is whoever puts that committee together, or that exercise together, is that they really establish the fact that it needs to be mutually respectful.
Right.
It needs to be open to the point that, you have to be free to be able to speak your mind, even if others disagree.
Right.
And you have to have the confidence that at the end, you went through this exercise. You may not come to a consensus agreement.
Right.
But that's okay. It's okay to go through that process. And I would find it hard to believe that you wouldn't find common ground somewhere.
Right.
I mean, we did with the tall mass timber.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone happy at the outcome? No. We were a little leery of going to 18 stories, but that's part of the consensus process. But everyone had a voice, and so it may identify, that exercise may identify what is needed to get there, right?
True.
What research is needed?
Yep.
Is there someone that can help fund that research? Is it, I don't know, is it fire performance? Is it a combination of fire protection systems? Is it egress calculations, limiting, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different factors that could go into that to be able to help that, but by getting everybody involved and having those, maybe a wider discussion, a more broad discussion, maybe we could come to, I don't want to say an agreement, but more of a consensus in the sense that maybe it could help address the factors on both sides, and help us, move the idea forward. Because I like I said, I do think that there's always going to be this discussion for affordable housing, but also too, we also need to maintain a level of safety for also the occupants and the firefighters that are going to respond. And that's part of that code development process. And I think that having these types of committees and groups are vitally important. The tall mass timber buildings show what we can accomplish by getting in the same room and talking things out and working on a subject or a topic.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I appreciate it. We're up at an hour, believe it or not.
Holy crap.
I know. Believe it. I was thinking the same thing. I looked down and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's already been an hour. Now, before we close, where can people find more information about the work that you're doing with IFF, and all the different things that we've kind of talked about through this episode?
So we our Department of Energy ESS report is on the IFF website. We're in the process of developing some educational modules to go with it. We also, it will be posted hopefully at the beginning of next week. We had a secondary project to that, which was residential exterior walls, post-construction energy performance. What we were looking at is balancing fire performance with energy performance in residential structures that are being rehabbed. So not just 1 and 2 family home, it can be in apartment buildings too. Those buildings are not subjected to NFPA 285.
Okay.
So that'll be posted. We did workshops. Those workshops are on tall timber buildings, PPE, energy storage systems, EVs. That's going to be posted on the IFF YouTube site. So that information is available. So www.iff.org. You can go in there and start searching. Ryan Heffernan, our AGP of Communications, has redone our website, so it's better. We still got more to do, but there's a lot happening, and we're actually developing an energy hazard guide.
Okay.
So responding to fires in vaults, electrical vaults, manholes, ESS, power lines. We're developing a guide that you can flip, recognize the hazards, recognize the PPE that's required. This isn't developed by the energy companies, it's developed by firefighters. We have Chris Green from Seattle, retired. He developed all their protocols for responding to energy. So Chris Towski from Cambridge. I got to throw the two Chris's in there.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think that all those will be definitely beneficial to the fire service, especially as we move forward. As we talk about these emerging trends and these emerging technologies, how do we better address that risk? I mean, I think about it, my department every day. How can I share this information and get this information out to everyone within the department, so that way they know, especially as these things come up, because I think that technology and everything that we're being impacted with every day continues to advance. We're in this revolution, and that revolution is I think about the cell phone that I have. I remember the first, I'm sure we all remember our first phones. My kids probably do too. They were probably iPhones when they first got them, but they don't remember the flip phones and the spotty coverage. And now, I mean, that was 10, 15 years ago. And now, look how far we've advanced.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And
I was going to be a corny dad joke, like this revolution won't be televised, but it will be streamed, right?
That's true anymore. I mean, so many of us get all our media, our news through social media or other outlets, and I can't remember the last time I listened to like regular terrestrial radio. I take that back. I think I did the other day, but it's I'm so used to it's paired with my car. I turn on my car, and then my whatever I had music I was playing in the office is now playing in my car. It just kind of carries over, and so it's just the modern conveniences and technology have definitely, but it's happened really fast.
I agree. Well, I appreciate it, Tim. Thank you very much.
Well, Sean, I appreciate you taking the time. This was a great conversation, and I hope others can learn a lot from our discussion today. So,
well, thanks. Take care. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Bye.